All right, well, good evening to everyone. We're about 7:32 p.m. here on this lovely evening, and I want to welcome everyone who's joined us tonight. This is part of our Temple Israel's virtual series of speakers, and we're thrilled to have Reverend Brandon with us this evening. Reverend Brandon, Reverend Mack Brandon, to be exact. His theme tonight is America at the Crossroads. Reverend Brandon is the pastor of the Metropolitan A.M.E Zion Church in Ridgewood since 2010. So about the last 11 years, he came to Ridgewood in 1984 to serve as the master music minister at that time. And as an excellent musician, Reverend Mack has led the choir and his church, and he's also graced us with his choir and combined choirs at Temple Israel. So I've had the pleasure of working with him, and it's been a delight. But tonight's program, which is going to be an interactive program, we look for everyone to participate. So you will have to decide as to when to unmute, but you can mute while the Reverend speaks. Rabbi Fine also will help us. And good evening, Rabbi. Welcome to joining us in this program. We look forward to your participation as well in making this dialogue an important one, as both of you get to look through America at the Crossroads through the lens of your synagogue and church, and that's going to make this a very special evening. So good evening, Reverend Mack. I want
Good
to welcome
evening.
you and ask you to kind of, even before I ask you to introduce yourself, I wanted to just mention that I hope that everyone who joins us tonight can be active listeners. And active listening is the opportunity to be thoughtful about what you're saying as a reflection of what you've heard. And by active listening, we can integrate the conversation into a meaningful dialogue. So that would be a really excellent thought about how we listen and how we participate. So Reverend Mack, Brandon, please join us and welcome everyone to this evening's program.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. As it seems that tonight is a casual night, so please call me Mac this evening. And if I may call you Robert, may I call you that?
Please do.
Okay. It is such a pleasure to be with you. I greatly respect and like your leader. He's just from the time that I came into the Interfaith Clergy Association when he was chairing it. I just learned to respect and appreciate his wisdom. And so I don't take it lightly that I have the opportunity to be before your sheep, as we say. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean that in an appreciative way. You know, when Robert asked me about what was interesting to me, I thought America at the Crossroads, because it seems that no matter what we say, we are in that place. We are in a place of crossroads in America. What I found out is that this is a series that has run since March, and I really appreciate that that is true. The week of George Floyd, I started a series as well. I think it was that very day. It was a Wednesday. And I'm not sure if it was that or Amy, the girl in Central Park, but I started a Zoom community series on March 2020, in March 2020. And this Wednesday, I think, will be the 63rd consecutive Wednesday that we have been running. The genesis of it was simply, we need to talk. We all need to talk as a community, as a country, as a village. And we need to talk with our authentic selves. That moment, George Floyd really brought out a lot of things that was true about who we were as a country. And I think that the things that were brought out are still very true. So my approach has always been to simply be a lens, hopefully a conduit that people can express themselves in whatever authentic way that is real for them, because only in doing that can we reach some communication. That is really my emphasis, and that's what I'm really interested in, is in culture and how culture interfaces. It was kind of the beginning of my study of music. I was interested in music of different cultures. I remember 1972, I was in Romania and Czechoslovakia, that was what it was called then, on a musical tour. And I was high school, and in a choir, and so we went over to Romania, Czechoslovakia. It was behind the Iron Curtain then at the time. CBS went with us, and I remember being in the square in Bucharest, and there was this folk group that was singing and dancing and playing, and I was enamored with them because it sounded like church. It sounded like the music, and there was resonances of the music from my church in Hackensack, where I grew up. And so I was interested in the strains, the metaphoric musical strains of culture that find themselves in as disparate places as Bucharest and Hackensack. And so this kind of ethnomusicological dig had ancillary components. And so it became an anthropological dig, if you will, that I was interested in. What are all the accoutrements? What are all the attachments of culture that find themselves in disparate places? And that extended to religion. What are the belief systems that we have? So all these years later, I'm still interested in that. And I think that we find ourselves in cycles where we are more or less interested in religion. But I think that trying times call upon us to acknowledge the tension of culture versus belief, culture versus spirituality, culture versus religion. Sometimes they're congruent, sometimes they are not. So one of the things that, and I'll start here, one of the things that is driven home to me is that there's this dichotomous relationship between advancement and technological advancement and our ancient-based lack of civility with each other. One of the things I say to each other is one of the things I say often is that, we're going to take all our crap to Mars and Moon, all our ancient stuff. And so when people poo-poo, faith-based conversation, the problem is that that they don't replace it. They really, really don't. And even within our houses of worship, many times, we can become so culturally and tradition and historically laden that we fail to talk about faith. It's an interesting thing, in Black churches, we have historically been kind of the center of social justice movement in our short American history. But if you were to worship, what you would see is that it's really faith-based. It's not, we don't do, cultural treatises. We don't just talk about tradition and culture. It's embedded, but it is faith-based first and foremost. And I think that the questions of faith get subsumed in our talk as a society. And I think that we as religious leaders, and when I say religious leaders, I don't just mean those in the clergy, but I think all of those of faith really have to raise the flag of faith. The issues which are found in for the Bible, for me, Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments, the issues which are found in ancient writ, the issues of, who do we and what do we worship as a society? I mean, these issues are as prominent now as they've ever been and will continue to be. And I think that they are the interesting conversation, because we are engaged in a couple of things. We're engaged in this faith walk, but we're also engaged in cultural wars. There are these streams that, if one is observant and one is observant about, our society in America or the society in the world, one has to acknowledge that there are these streams, some of which are very scary. And they are in every corner. No one has the patent of heroism. No one has the patent as the protagonist, right? We all have these layers that we're laden with. And the problem is sometimes people are reticent to talk about the layers or even to acknowledge them, to look at them. So the question for me is, where are we going? Where are we going? And it sometimes it takes a bit of conversation to look forward, because we spent a lot of time looking back, looking at the misdeeds of the past. We spent a lot of time, and rightly so, by the way, and we spent a lot of time looking at the misdeeds of the present. But then the question becomes, okay, now that we've acknowledged that, now that we've laid that out, now that we've laid out that there are differences in terms of the way we perceive the present, where really are we headed? Sometimes it has been disconcerting for some folks when I say that, God did not create any new land in America. He's not creating any new geographical borders. And so we are going to have to figure out how to get along. It's not what you want to hear when you're in the middle of war, however. And I get that. And there are these streams of the cultural war which get played out. Let me give you an example. After George Floyd, there was this movement of marches en masse. It was amazing to see around the country and around the world, people were marching. Black Lives Matter. There were a few instances where at the tail end of a march, there was some violence. Now, one of the truths of social media is that social media will glam on to particular aspects. But then there was a question about violence, and what is the role of violence? And there shouldn't be violence. But some people said, well, listen, the flare of frustration is such that you can almost understand violence, right? And in the middle of war, that makes sense. But when you're peace loving, you say, no, there's no instance of violence that is justifiable. I say that as an extreme example because when we get into any touchy subject, there are going to be actors on the extreme ends who are proffering a position that is difficult, but it has the same means. It has the same end. They're different means, but they have a same end, which is justice, right? So I'm interested in hearing all the voices and hearing the different voices that are aiming for justice. Now, here's a question. What does justice look like? Right? That's a problem. What does justice look like? And they're hard questions. One of the questions is power sharing. If someone, if a group of people of their meritorious accord is gaining power, how is another group, are they okay with that sharing of power? And of course, these are the questions, these are American questions, and they get played out in Congress, right? And they get played out in Senate. And some of the things that, are passed or not passed, you scratch your head and you say, why? What are they thinking? And you're saying, wait a minute, I think this is 2021. I teach about this stuff. I teach it when I teach 1961, some of the things that are being said would seem to the college students to be, I teach at Ramapo College, by the way. It's my 27th year. would seem to be like, wow, they were fairly Neanderthal back then, weren't they? I'm so glad that we're civilized, right? But if you turn on the news, you'll hear resonances of that. So the question is, where do we want to go and who do we want to be? And I think the only answer is really in our communication, in our authentic communication. And sometimes, we make faux pas in our communication, but at least we're telling our truth. So in a way, I was sort of hardened. I was hardened only for a minute, in the last 4 years, where there was statistically more divisiveness and vocal divisiveness, and the rise of groups that heretofore would have been undercover. Well, the covers were ripped off, and they gladly ripped them off and said, "Here we are." So the question, the question becomes like, oh, well, this is a great thing. People are finally saying who they are. But what was problematic was that there wasn't enough in terms of folks saying this is what justice should look like. This is what being fair looks like. You would hear these voices and it seemed like you wouldn't hear an answer to it. So I think that the answer for us locally is to do exactly, Robert, what you're doing, which is doing this series. And it can be about anything. It can be about whatever subjects, as long as we're talking to each other. My series, I had the 2 weeks ago, I had the president of the National Dental Association, right? And what is interesting is that no matter what the subject is, if you are interested in culture, if you're interested in society, some of these questions will dovetail with it. And so it's been a really interesting thing to have folks from different walks of life to come through, as you are doing with this series as well. So, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and this sense of in our houses of worship, who shall we be is a big issue for me. Who shall we be? Shall we simply be the places that people get a reiteration of their culture and traditions, or shall it be a place that we really say, listen, we need to fortify our faith? There's a whole movement of folks who poo-poo religion of every sort. And they say, I'm not for religion, but I'm very spiritual. And I respect it. I would probably want to ask more questions to see what they mean. And spirituality is a great thing. And so on the face of it, I certainly agree. But I'm telling you that we reach nadirs of conditions where we got to call on something. And sometimes calling on ourselves is not enough. Now, in this society, you're saying, oh, you sound like a preacher now, right? Because in this society, we think, oh, we can do it all. And I was just counseling a woman who was 60, and I've been counseling her all week, and actually for the last year, who has had much violence occasioned upon her life within her family. And she is, throwing out the lifeline to any people who can help her. And I, throws out the lifeline. She's not in this country, and I'm giving the best advice I can. But at a certain point, I started sending her Psalms, and I started saying, what, you need to reach out, because there's something beyond this. This is my belief, and I operate from my belief that there's more than this stuff, right? There is natural, but there is supernatural. There's more than this stuff. Now, however you define supernatural, we can get into that and, come to church or go to temple, and you'll get more on the supernatural. But I'm saying that there's more. Sometimes we reach a place that we need to hold on to something more. And, those ancient texts give us this foundation. So I gave her Psalm 23 and Psalm 27. And, these Psalms in which you hold on and say, and let me say this, in our privilege and in this country, in America, it is a country of privilege. It's a wonderful, we have some privileges other places just don't see. Every day I talk to folks in Africa and France and England. I have been in, places, as many of you have, where, some of the things we take for granted are just absolute privileges. It's amazing privilege. Taking a hot shower is a real privilege, right? And so sometimes we can find ourselves in a place of comfort in that privilege that we think, we can work it out. We can work all this out. This is, no matter what happens to you, there's always, right? And what's interesting, during the pandemic, there was at first kind of the assault of the pandemic where everything closed down and people were scared. People didn't quite know what to do. And I think that there were some people who were pleasantly surprised that, we didn't end up like in French Revolution. There wasn't mobs in the streets, that people were laying low and they were somehow paying the mortgage and the rent and catching up. And it seemed like, okay, we'll wait until the stores open and we can hunker down and wait this thing out. And it seemed like all was quiet on the Western Front, But now we're starting to see, as we speak to people, that there has been immense injury in terms of fear and psychological damage. And some of these kids I teach, there are people who have lost a full year, of their educational life. There have been people who, because they've had to be home in every realm, it's been very, very difficult. And those stats, I think, will emerge. And so as we look to the future and we look to see, what are going to be the problems of the future, we also see that there are streams of wonderful civility. I happen to have Rabbi Fine's son on my, I call it the show, on my community Zoom about 4 weeks ago. And he had his friend on with him. And I was just immensely proud, here's a little seedling in the village of Ridgewood who has been watered by his parents and by the community. And his friend was no less, wonderful in terms of his interest in the community and his interest in life. And you see these youth, you see this generation, and that there are pockets of, I call it civility, pockets of understanding and activism that are so, fills one with so much optimism. And yet there are these currents that are so very negative. So I think as these two cross currents buttress against each other, that we have to be engaged in communication. Otherwise, what we're going to have is a very disparate, 2 societies, 3 societies, 4 societies, 5 societies. I was talking to a friend from France about 4 or 5 hours ago, and I said, listen, I got to do this work, I have to do this work, and then I'm going to talk in a Zoom with Temple Israel. And she's from France, and she said, oh, really? You're going to talk to Temple, a Jewish temple? And she said, they isolate themselves. They're very isolated, I said, okay. Not so in Ridgewood, but she had a perception that was very, very strident. Like, how is it that you're going to speak to folks who want to isolate themselves, And so we have all of these perceptions. The same is true in African-American community, the African-American church. And, I've had people say, is it okay if I come to church? And I want to say, can you please get me a Bible? Did you find anywhere where God said, no, it's not okay if you come? Well, oh no, you're restricted, blacks only. There are these perceptions that we have in society and culture that are really only erased by us talking to each other. And so no question is naive or too small. And we simply have to be engaged in being empathetic and hearing with a, I call it a godly heart, at least an empathetic heart, hearing each other and recognizing that underneath all of these shells, these different shells of perception, that we are all really, hearts that long for love. I mean, you showed me the most hardened person, and I have met some really, really hardened people who have done some really hardened based things. And you get them in the quiet place and you realize, wow, we all really do want the same thing. And some of us actually didn't receive it at certain points. And so, fear came or anger came, and it hardened our hearts. And so we as a society, I think more than ever have to have people of faith rise and declare the empathetic. And the language.
Reverend Mack, let me interrupt you for a minute.
Yeah.
That's a great introduction and really sets the stage for a variety of thoughts. And I wanted to start off the first one, and I would encourage others to participate, and Rabbi Fine can help in the interactions that we might have. Can you give us some perspective with George Floyd in the Ridgewood area, the Ridgewood community, your church?
Hold on just a second, Robert. Hold on just a second, please.
Sure.
I'm at 2%, so I got to get my cord very quickly. I'm so sorry.
Oh, all right. All right, very good. 2% will get you moving.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
All right, you get what you got to get, because without any power, the communication will definitely break down. We have to do that.
Okay, hold on just a second.
All right. Get you back. By the way, anyone who wants to put questions into chat, feel free to do that as we go along the way, and we'll feed that back to Reverend.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Just give me a second as I plug in. I just saw the red thing go off, and I'm like, oh boy, this would be very embarrassing.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to lose you.
Okay. I'm back. Okay.
Oh, great. Sounds like you're powered up. Sounds good.
Yes.
All right. So my starting question is the George Floyd. How did that affect your church, Ridgewood, or are we in such a community that we are already doing a great job dialoguing and working with the police, that none of those issues, or certainly those issues, are minor in contrast to other parts of the country? What was the local response from your end that you might give us feedback on?
Okay, there's a lot of parts, a lot of answers there, but let me say that I think that the African American community in Ridgewood is about 1.6%. So I think that there are two things that are very true in terms of African American experience in Ridgewood specifically. The first thing is true is that all of the issues of bias, every unless the person has moved in and moved to the heights from somewhere, and they're kind of, a new village resident, I think all of the issues are issues that we all feel. I'm a pastor, but I've been stopped many times by police. And I think everyone has, when they've left the city, or maybe even in the village, they've experienced stuff, but certainly when they've experienced things, because this is not something that turns off when you go over the line, the village line. So I think that people really felt when George Floyd happened that here was yet another instance. And I think people were really pained, so pained that I think that people, in addition to the pandemic, I think they were stilled. They were stilled in their homes because of the pain of it. Now, the other side of that is that the educational experience in Ridgewood is such that that one is made to feel that this is a city that, or this is a village that, is really wonderful in terms of ethnic relations, in terms of ability, ability and all those isms that happen. You hear things come up, but people are by and large really proud to graduate through the Ridgewood system. So I think there's two sides of it. So when it was time for the marches, there was a march in Ridgewood, march in Glen Rock, and it was marches everywhere. And after, I think it was really shocking to the African American community because this was another death, right? This may have been the death that ignited the world. This may have been the death that was like Pettus Bridge, but this was yet another death for us. And so it was another pain, but to watch the reaction from white residents was really, really quite something. It was really quite something. And to turn on the TV and see these marches happening in Berlin and Paris and Dakar and all over the place, it was a pretty amazing thing. So I think that we kind of live certainly in places, and this is a middle class suburb, upper middle class suburb. I think we live with kind of two realities, and it depends on your social economic status. The degree to which you feel it. So that was somewhat long, but the short answer is it really varies, and we have a duality of the African American experience, which does not turn off in Ridgewood, no matter where you go. Because if I want to go to the mall, I'm going to experience the things that I experience. If I want to go to the city, whatever, I'm going to experience in America this, this terrible sense of caste in places. It's just part of the reality. But by the same token, in terms of it's a wonderful community we're in, and so we live with this tension. And I would imagine that what I'm saying and what I'm saying might resonate with any group, right? You live with the tension of the comfort of the village, but being self-aware of your particular group, there are instances where you feel the pain, right? Both historically and in the present. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, great job. Others have some questions. Alan Sanders, you can't sit there so passively without jumping into the conversation. I can't let you sit there and not do that. There must be some political perspective. You have to join us.
Well, I just would like the Reverend to speak a little bit more about social media, because I really think, and you touched on that about technology affecting us. I'm one of those who are very skeptical of the benefits of technology, because so much hatred goes through social media. And the problem with social media is not just its pervasiveness, but the fact that it allows people to speak anonymously. And that really allows the worst in humans to emerge. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, how we could tame, if we could, social media to be a more productive force rather than such a destructive element. And it's true across racial issues, it's true across religious issues. It's just awful. People hide behind their anonymity and say the most awful things.
So it's a real problem. And here is, everything goes through cycles, right? So with the emergence of social media is a wonderful thing, as far as I'm concerned. The proletariat has voice, is given voice. Everyone can speak. I come from the music business, where record companies had control over the distribution of property. And with the computer came the dissolution of those companies, because everybody could now be a record company. Everyone could be a sole proprietor and everyone could have their voice heard. The same was true with social media, that people could voice of their dissent, they could voice their accent, they could voice, whatever it is that they wanted to. But what happens is inevitably in the cycle that there are ways that are conceived of to corral that media, so that it's not just the mob who has voice. Now we are putting those mobs in silos so that they talk to each other, right? So if you think of Facebook and you think that, everyone has Facebook, everyone has an opportunity to say what they feel. But with the algorithms, really, we're talking to the choir, we're talking to each other, and we're getting each other excited, right? And riled up. And so I think that in the early days of social media, when we looked at the potential, if you think about this, when I go back to 1963, 64, the civil rights movement, and how so much of it was word of mouth. It was word of mouth through churches. How would it have been different with social media? Are there any number of movements, and I'm sure you guys have talked about them. I'm sure Rabbi Fine has talked about that in terms, I know he's a historian, in terms of Germany and what have you. What social media, what would the effect have been? On one hand, certainly an awareness is a wonderful thing, and it is something that every person has an awareness. But the problem is, what awareness do they have now? And so, yeah, social media is problematic. We saw that in terms of in the aftermath of January 6th. Whoever controls the mic can control a narrative, and it's really, you could listen, if you could tell a good lie and you tell it well, and you have enough influence, you can get a whole bunch of people following that lie. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. And it speaks to what you were just saying. I mean, the influence of social media, it's become its own animal. Remember Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the massage, right? And when I read that when I was a kid, I was looking at it, and he was just, so prophetic. And I was thinking about, the media is not that important, but that was understating the case. So we are in a very delicate time now, where I remember when President Obama would say often, that's not who we are, right? That's not who we are. And I would say to myself, thank you, thank you, President. And President Biden sometimes said, well, that's not who we are. I actually did not hear it for 4 years, but that's not who we are. Kind of a voice, the fatherly voice of decency, right? But that is who we are. And because there has been, those voices now have not been influential enough. So now the dissenting voices, now the childlike voices, now the rebellious voices, now, the delinquent voices have so much voice that they can actually be, well, this is the truth. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's a real problem. It's a real problem. Gone are the days when Walter Cronkite would come on and what he said was it, right? It was it. Everyone has the same news, and between that, Washington Post, New York Times, you said, okay, well, now we know the truth, right? However manufactured. But now everybody gets to manufacture their own truth each and every day. And to see what is going on in the fracturing of our society, it's really, really, really painful. So I don't know what the truth is, but I do know that as a faith leader, that the truth is embedded in the things that we learn, the things that we practice, and who we are. When we say that's not who we are must come from somewhere. Right. We don't get to manufacture principle. We don't get to manufacture what's right and what's wrong, right? That's the problem. I say people of faith have to really rise up and say, listen, wherever you're coming from, whatever seed of faith is, are we loving our neighbor as ourselves? And do we see ourselves as, the golden calf to be worshiped? Or, in fact, are we looking beyond that?
Right.
Okay.
I think it's important, and I don't know what the solution is, but civility is viewed as, well, that's not modern, that's not trendy. Asking that people behave morally, or this is an immoral statement or an immoral behavior, again, that's not trendy. I think the forces of civility and morality have to sort of stand up and speak out and call out what is considered immoral or improper or uncivil behavior, because incivility is the thing. It's the in thing. It's the trendy thing. And I think it's very important to start the dialogue and change the dialogue and say, no, you're not with it. You're not modern. You're not trendy. You're not the future. You're actually, the problem. You are the problem. You are not the solution. And I just think people that are concerned about morality and civility need to speak more loudly, both individuals, but also the leaders who believe in civility and morality.
So here's the problem. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are that you're telling me what's civil, that you're telling me what's moral? See, that's where we are now. Who do you think you are? You're saying, oh, that's civil. It's not civil in me. I have the right, right? We get what is right and having the right confused, right? People have the right to do all sorts of things, and we defend the right of folks to do. But is it right? And what's the genesis of this rightness? So, and by the way, I'm agreeing with you. But for playing devil's advocate, I'm saying, if you're saying, well, listen, I think the people have to stand up and say this is moral. But I'm saying because of this same social media you've talked about, there is a whole segment which says that's not morality at all. This is my morality. Right? And there's the problem. And that's why I say, people of faith have to, in their own way, say, stand beside you when you're saying what you're saying and saying, yeah, I agree with you. We can't be kind of these bystanders. We can't be lukewarm in our standing up for, am I my brother's keeper? Well, yeah, we have to stand next to each other. And I think that it's part of our faith walk to do so, So I do agree with you.
Rabbi Fine, you got to unmute. Or you look unmuted. Oh, you're muted now. Try unmuting. We don't hear you. Oh dear. A rabbi who's been muted. This is a terrible thing. All right.
You've silenced your rabbi.
Silence our own rabbi. This is a thing that I was never looking forward to doing, but this time around, I can't seem to get any sound out of his.
He's going out to what I think Idaho, and you're afraid that he has been influenced out there.
Perhaps.
Yes.
What's this? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Idaho. I was in Idaho just recently, but okay.
Yes.
So, Reverend, I think in a sense that dichotomy between morality, people and faith, and others has always been there. I mean, Scripture, the Bible wouldn't say love your neighbor if people weren't loving their neighbor.
That's right. That's right.
Wouldn't say love the stranger if people hated the stranger.
That's right.
So sometimes, and that's how I, as an historian, that we look at that evidence that you have that shows you read it reversed, and it tells us how people behaved or misbehaved.
That's right.
There's always been that those different views and different paths that have been for people to take, and always a burden on religious leaders and other voices of morality to speak out against, even if it's a majority path, to speak out against that and say that we have to go another direction.
That's
I think
right.
social media makes everything move faster, but from the moment that we learned how to speak with each other and communicate, we communicated things that weren't nice to other people. And part of it, I think, goes back to what you were saying with finding the way to communicate with each other and find a common path. It was so moving. You spoke about, even recognizing that even though we live in a wonderful, privileged community, nevertheless, part of the African American experience is you still encounter things, and that's just the way things are. And I was listening to you and thinking that's as Jews, we also feel that way. We feel a great sense of privilege of living in a wonderful country where we have rights, and at the same time, we still encounter prejudice and anti-Semitism and hatred. And sometimes we encounter it in the sense where the greater public doesn't appreciate it's there. And it says, well, living in a good community, you don't have the problems in Ridgewood like I have in Minneapolis or other places. We get that all the time too. And we do have problems in Ridgewood as well. And I think part of the, so grateful for you joining us tonight, and where we recognize, I know that we do recognize that we have so much more work to do, and finding to do the work with each other.
That's right.
And how to raise that common voice. It's not, I saw one of the comments on the chat, it's not Black Lives Matter and Asian Lives Matter and Jewish, it's all lives matter, but they all matter individually, which is why each one needs to be called out. That we generalize, then we run the danger of not recognizing where the prejudice is, even when it's under our own noses. And the first step is to be able to talk about that and to recognize it. So.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah.
So let me jump in. Does Rabbi Rubin, you can't sit there just idly either. Is it the responsibility of the faith communities across the board to be speaking louder with a louder voice on a Judeo-Christian Bible basis to establish that normalcy of what is right? Because Reverend Mack, I'm of the support that there are good people on both sides belief system, that people on the other side have a different value system as to what their idea of right is. And is it the faith community that has a responsibility? Rabbi Rubin, you can jump in.
Thank you. I want to address something a little differently. And that's an issue that Mac, I don't know if you remember me.
You're the one from Westwood, right? Yes.
No. I'm a member of Temple Israel, but I'm also a rabbi. And I used to come to clergy meetings, to clergy associations.
Yes, that's right.
So we've met each other. We've met each other.
Yes.
I also want to mention that I've done a lot of work in and teaching about identifying the lenses through which we see the world, which is kind of what you're talking about. And I've had a fair amount of experience in interfaith dialogue. But my question to you is, in my experience, before we can stand together, before we can, we can stand together, but before we can really make progress, we have to get to know each other.
That's right.
We have to get to know each other on a very deep way. And what triggered that thought for me was when Alan, who disappeared, was talking about civility, and you responded very passionately and appropriately with, how are we talking about civility? What civility are you talking about? You had an emotional reaction to that. And that's fine, but how do we get from, okay, people of faith are going to get together and we're going to talk about these issues, to a level of trust where we know each other so well that we can trust that the intention, what the intention of the other person is, and even begin to understand what the other person is saying. I was the rabbi up in Ringwood, Wanacue for 4 years.
Ringwood.
Yeah, and I was involved in dialogue there. And I met for several years with a Presbyterian minister over breakfast. And we realized after 6 months that we were both English speakers and that we didn't understand what the other person was saying. And so for the next 6 months, we defined words. And the last word we defined was the word responsibility.
Mm.
He said to me, Jews have to take responsibility for the Holocaust. Now,
Oh, okay.
at that point, I knew him well enough to say, Ben, how are you using the word responsibility? And he wasn't using it the way you received it and the way I received it in that moment. How do we go from having conversations like this, which accomplish quite a bit, but to a deeper level where we can truly be partners?
Okay, so this is a question that I actually ask often, and let me give you the final answer, and then I'll work my way backward. It really comes down to the empathy in our hearts individually. The question has been asked, well, how can we improve relations when the Black Lives Matter, which is not about an organization, it's about a movement, right? And that's very important to understand. Some people try to dissect it as it's a movement that has many ancillary. It's one can equate it with the civil rights movement. So in the middle of this, people were saying, well, how can we dialogue with the community, especially in a community where you're 1.7% of the people are African American? It's pretty hard. You got to go look for them. The answer is your heart. If your heart is empathetic, you're actually curious to know who people are that are not within your immediate realm. One of the things that happened in the weeks after after George Floyd, and actually the immediate week after all those marches, was it is actually rare as an African American that white people greet you. They don't say hello on the street. Black people say hello in the street. I don't have to know who a Black person is. Hey, how you doing? White people, you work in your work. You go in your world. I go in my. This is our norm. All of a sudden, white people are saying hello. Like, what happened? Do I have something on my shirt? What's going on? People, at the end, But what happened was there was an increase in empathy, right? And that increase in empathy means that not just me as an African American, but people of all sorts. You're interested in who they are and and where they're coming from. And that creates the beginning of dialogue because you're actually interested in them as a human being. So you say, well, what can I do in Ridgewood? What you can do is be more empathetic, because not only is there, the African American issue, there's the Jewish issue, there's the Asian issue, there are all of these, there's the ability issue, right? There's all of these issues. And if your heart is one that is empathetic, you're interested in people. And like I always say, my favorite toy, my favorite toy that I never received, I'm not sure if any of you ever had a toy that you wanted to get, but to this day, you never received it as a child. My favorite toy was the ant farm. The ant farm. I wanted the ant farm to watch all the ants make their tunnels. I never got it. I may still get it. I may go on Amazon when this is over. But the thing about the ant farm is that below the surface, the ants are making colonies and making inroads to each other and to fertilizing society. And so it is with empathetic hearts that we fertilize society by speaking, by being simply interested in each other. Look, in the Christian community, you want to see a divide? Talk to white Protestants and Black Protestants. You may start a war because you can't be further apart. Right? Look at the stats. I mean, you cannot be further apart. This thing gets played out. And so how do people of the same denomination, how do they talk with each other? Well, I submit to you that this is a very prescient question. And it really comes down to the empathy in our heart. Exactly what you did with that Presbyterian minister. Yeah.
But how do I know? I trust your heart is open and is empathetic. But how do I know when I meet someone else who says to me, my heart is open, I'm empathetic, and I'm playing devil's advocate here,
No,
Matt.
I understand.
Okay. How does anyone know? Let me not personalize.
Yes, I'm with
How
you.
does someone know that the person they're talking to has an open heart to receive and can filter out their own worldview to listen on a deep level to yours?
Okay, so here it is. Now I'm going to talk as Mack now. I'm not talking as Reverend Mack Brandon, right? So if I see a white person and I'm in not an intimate conversation, I see them in the larger picture as the enemy in a culture war. I don't expect them to be nice. I don't expect them to be my friend. I see that they're white and they've been conditioned systemically to see me as a particular thing, and I don't expect anything of them. I'm talking as Mack now, right? Hang with me. But that cannot stop my vulnerability. That cannot stop me from having an empathetic heart, right? Because if I start there, it's all over. So there are many times that you walk into battle, right? You walk into conversation, and I was born in Salisbury, North Carolina. When I go and I talk to some of my Southern brothers and sisters, they can't get 3 sentences out without insulting me, right? But exactly your experience is where someone's got to take the weight. Someone's got to be the person to say, I'm vulnerable. I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to be loving, right? And even though you're getting ready to shoot an arrow that maybe your heart does not intend, you're going to shoot an arrow. I'm going to take that heart because it's the only way for us to create dialogue. And so there is this thing, I have 7 days a week, 365 days. I have a prayer, a call-in prayer from 7 o'clock to 7:30, calling in. And I've done it for 7 years, 7 days a week, 365 days, people calling for prayer. Because I say everyone has to start in prayer because you need your ammunition. You need ammunition because this is a, hardened, hearted world. And I think that one has to, as people of faith, we have to intentionally say that I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable and to be loving because it is that offense. It is that offense to the other side that will create change. And it is an intention, and one either engages in that battle or engages in a status quo, which is very dangerous.
I'd want to encourage anyone else to unmute and speak to or ask a question or begin engage the dialogue that we've been having. And certainly, I'm going to pass the computer over to my wife, who's got a question. This is my wife, Barbara.
Hey, Barbara.
Hi, Mac. So I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm saying to myself, okay, so I'm walking down the street, you're walking the opposite direction. I'm white, you're black. And I say to you, hi, isn't it a beautiful day? Just that act of speaking to you, taking that step, because you're right. I've been conditioned to just kind of, maybe I see you, and then I look the other way because I don't want to, I don't want to lock eyes with you because I don't want that awkward silence. So I just sort of, I'll look the other way and I'll continue walking and not say a thing. But if I open my mouth and greet you, then you're going to greet me back. And we've now broken that tension. Maybe we don't have more than, 10 words together, but a white person has spoken to a black person and the black person has spoken back. And, I think that's the beginning of how to reach out to each other.
And here's the thing. And so I'd like to think that I'm evolved, right? Because it pleases me. But there may be some who don't speak back. And so are you willing for the next person for you to do the same thing? That's a question. I was walking around the Glen Rock track, the Glen Rock High School, trying to take some of these pounds off. And I was walking, and there were four maintenance men who are of Jamaican descent. And they were, listen, we create all these silos, and they could see that I'm African American, and of course there's stuff there too. I won't even bother, but and so they didn't say anything to me. So my first reaction was to say, you're not gonna say anything to me. I'm not gonna say anything to you. I still got 2 laps to do. And then I had to draw on my faith, and I had to remind myself of who I say I am. And the funny thing was, and then I greeted them, together, and I said, hey guys, how are you doing? And their hearts opened up, right? But someone had to make the move. And even though the temptation was to get on my haunches and say, okay, the imperative is to continue to reach out. And so you may say hello to someone and I have to say, when people have done it to me, sometimes it registers me that they actually spoke to me about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 feet after they've said anything. I said, were they talking to me? I think they were talking to me, right? This is absolutely true. If you can catch them, right? You get over the shock, you say, well, hey, how you doing? But there's some people who have their own issues, and they may not want to. Like I said, this is a cultural war. Some people not, but then the question is, are you prepared to yet be vulnerable again, right? And so that is the work that we can do. That is the work, because I think it was such an important question. What can we actually do tomorrow and the next day, so that we're not speaking purely theoretically? So that we're not just speaking purely of offense, but we're speaking of how we make this world a better place. And it really comes down to what we each individually do in our everyday. So no, we don't have to necessarily, we don't have to take workshops. The next time you go into, whatever restaurant, the Daily Treat, right? Is your heart, intentionally open, right? And the funny thing about that is, not only does it become wonderfully expansive to a particular group, but it becomes wonderfully expansive to humanity in general. So you end up learning about all sorts of people. And one of the things that happens when you start learning about people is that you gain humility, because you realize how small your stuff is, how small you are, how much a part of a larger current of history you are, how much a part of a larger sociological mass of movement you are in. It's an interesting thing. Sometimes we have to leave our environment to see the largesse of others. Like, I like to go to Paris like twice a year, and I go to museums and whatever, and I see, wow, this is amazing. And when I go to Cairo and to the museum, I'm like, this is, it gives me a new perspective. I know a few years ago, Rabbi Fine had a trip to Israel, which if I had more money, I would have been on it. But the way they talked about it, that it was a great experience. It wasn't the first time, obviously, for them, but for those who it was a great experience to see the largesse of what they're walking in. So I think that that is our imperative, to have empathy. The empathy will engender humility and curiosity, and we'll learn more about each other. And as we do that, we grow more as individuals. And before you know it, in your own way, because that day will come when the life is over, in your own way, you would have been one of those ants in the farm. And you would have been, what side were you on? I was on the side of contribution. I was on the side of fertilization. I was on the side of creating this society to be that which sometimes people say, well, this is the moral right. This is the right thing. This is not who we are. but I want to be a person who stands up and says, I was a contributor to that. Maybe it was only 2 or 3 people. Maybe it was 4 people. Maybe it was 4,000. But whatever my contribution is, I want to be on that side.
May I ask
Great
a
job.
question, please?
Please.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that you made a differential between the Black Lives Movement and the Black Lives
Organization.
organization. You want to elaborate on that a little bit for me?
Sure. The Black Lives Matter was actually an organization that came out of killing, I believe, in Minneapolis, and Black Lives Matter became a chant and a symbolic, metaphoric, emblematic, not only chant, but a label of a movement of recognition of some of the inequities in society. So one of the things that happened was, in order to eclipse this movement, same thing happened in the civil rights movement. And I'm just going back that far. We can go back historically, same thing happened, so one of the efforts to eclipse it was to say, well, there are problems with the organization, right? Even within the church, one of the things the organizers, just to give you an example, the organizers, many of the organizers were, I don't want to say anti-church, but they were dissatisfied with what the church movement has become. The civil rights movement was identified within the Black community as kind of a church-led movement, which exactly it was. But this was considered an acephalous movement, a movement that didn't have a head, the charismatic head like Martin Luther King. It was an acephalous movement, and it was not religiously based. And so that was intentional, that we said it's going to be more of a civil, more of a secular base than a sacred base. And so, but within the community, there were some people who said, but we've always, as the church has always been at the center, right? And then we decided we would not let this small thing hinder us, that we would walk alongside it. And the movement became an umbrella. It became an aesthetic. It became this idea, and more than a notion, but this idea that to call attention to the inequities. If you remember, there were any series of murders that had happened, but certain news outlets would find things about, leadership of a particular organization called Black Lives Matter, that they would say, well, see, that whole movement is fraud. And in fact, the movement is so much larger an organization. In fact, most people really don't know much about the organization, but they do know that that Black Lives Matter. And that's simply a statement that yes, all lives do matter. And when we are at the point that we recognize the kind of empathy I was talking about, when our society recognizes that and moves on that, all lives will matter equally. Until that point, then it is important to say. So one of the things that happened was, I had police, I had different police on my Zoom, and they said, as a retort to Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, right? And it was, there was all of these things that, it's like, it's okay. It's okay. Let's recognize, what is true, that, there is a disparagement in our community of different groups. And it's okay to recognize that in an effort to give voice to those groups, and in an effort to enlarge the scope of our empathy and our humanity. It's okay to do that. So whenever, it was one of the, if you will, kind of conservative retorts to the Lives Matter proposition. The notion that, America has become divisive. If I can just say for a second, this notion of America, there's a segment of society that does not want justice. They want quiet. They don't want justice, they want quiet. Now, if you've ever been a dysfunctional family, at a certain point, the people who are there as injustice, maybe you're the middle child, maybe you're the youngest child, or maybe there's something that has happened in your family, right? That at a certain point, you're going to scream. You're going to holler. At a certain point, you're going to scream justice. It may take 40 years, who knows, right? It may, whatever the time is, right? But what you do ultimately want in that family is justice. And the people who there has been injustice wrought, they're going to scream at a certain point. And so it is in American society. You can't expect, you can't expect, you know, our history not to create voices that say, this is who I am. You know, I am a man. I am American, and I deserve all the privileges thereof, both legally and socially. You can't expect people not to do that, and that's with any group. I don't choose. I am African American, but I don't choose to live in kind of a narrow framework that everything is about, you know, black-white relationships. It's all sorts of relationships, right? But it is so important. It's so important to understand. I lost my train of thought, but so important to understand that all lives do matter, but that calling out individual lives. And so when I hear about the ability folks, you know, yelling at Ramapo College, we had one of the most forward programs for folks with different abilities. In terms of installing, you know, walkways and handicaps, we were way ahead of the curve, right? And some folks were like, well, why are we caring about that? Right? And the truth is the matter. The truth of the matter is those people who had those voices and spoke for, you know, now we see, you know, they were invisible, and we thought that the quiet was justice. It was not justice. It was simply quiet. So when we see these voices raised in our society, we have to look at it kind of, you know, kind of understanding. It's like this family. It's like this great big dysfunctional family. We all came here for different reasons and under different circumstances, right? And but we're here. And like any family, we got to work it out. And so it means that we absolutely have to continue to communicate. And sometimes when people say ouch, we have to listen to the ouch. And we have to run and, you know, we have to get to solve the mercurochrome or whatever it is, so that we can begin to heal the wound. So when someone says ouch, you know, what do you say, mama? Do you say, be quiet? No, what's wrong, dear? So the question is, you know, will our society, you know, be willing, will voices be willing, will hearts be willing to say, what's wrong, dear? And to treat those maladies appropriately.
That's a great point. James, do you have any last words that you want to share with us? James is our synagogue president and taking on a new leadership role. I think this gives him some thought-provoking reflections on adding to the conversation. James?
Thank you. Yes, I'm not Howard Schreiber. I'm James Goldfarb. I logged on to Minion yesterday with Howard's login credentials. Shh, don't tell Howard. So it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you very much for spending time and helping us open our eyes and understand what we can do better to help try to reduce I'm sure it would be an infinitesimally small way, but try to help reduce the tensions. And I confess I've been texting with the rabbi about ways that your congregation and your members might join together with our members and explore some of the common themes in our history and some of the points of departure, and figure out how we can walk forward together with empathy in our hearts towards one another, and make things in Ridgewood, if not the broader Bergen County or the state of New Jersey, but things in Ridgewood more comfortable, both between Jewish communities and African American communities, but also just between our fellow citizens in the immediate area.
All right, well said, James. Do appreciate that. Rabbi Fine, any other thoughts that you have for us this evening?
And, you know, it's to hear each other is so important, but it's the beginning, you know, to go what James said. And we, you know, recognize we're heading, you know, we have a vision of justice. And like we said, looking back in the, you know, those statements, love your neighbor, love the stranger, they're aspirational statements. They're not descriptions of fact. And it's a long journey to achieve that. And you know, it's we have the saying in the Talmud, it's not for us to, may not be us for us to complete the job, but neither may we desist from it.
Good point. So I don't want to end without giving anyone else an opportunity to speak up or share a thought. Feel free to do that, unmute at this time.
Hi, I have a couple of things I'd like to say.
Go, Mark.
Oh, first of all, I have heard Mack's Ant Farm story a few times before. It never gets old. It's a great story. But I wanted to say that ever since George Floyd, I have been on this personal quest for knowledge, trying to understand our history, where we've come from to get to where we are as a country as it relates to race relations. And a lot of what I've been able to learn from Mack and Mack's friends. And I definitely recommend that if anybody wants to take that journey, it's not a bad place to start by talking to Mack and talking to the people that Mack knows, because they have the experience. And it's been very enlightening for me to be able to do that. And I've spent better part of the last 14 months on this journey. I mean, I haven't made all 65 of them, but I've tried to make as many as I can.
You've been on quite a few of them.
Definitely the man to go to for knowledge. I just wanted to get that out there. So
Well,
no questions. That's it.
Thank you very much. And I will, send the Zoom link. Also, I'm on Facebook. Mack Brown is the public page. Every week I have the Zoom link. And if you'd like to join, it's on Wednesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. And people from different walks of life for an hour and a half, just talk to Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. So I'll just come in my page and you'll see the Zoom, or I'll, send it to you, Robert. And if you care to join, it's a casual conversation. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Starting the conversation.
Well, you did a great job tonight starting a conversation. And I knew when I spoke to Rabbi Fine months ago about saying, how can I get a hold of Mack Brandon and have him join us? And the Rabbi was instrumental in making that happen. And I'm very pleased that he did. So it's been a great evening with you. You've opened up a lot of thoughts that we would not have had without your opportunity to speak with us. And I really do appreciate it. And you've kept the bar quite high on our series of speakers. And that is a real tribute to the programs we've had each week. And I'm delighted that you were here. And I again want to thank you for your time and energy. And we need to keep the dialogue going. I hope that we can invite you back again to another time, and we can continue this conversation, because perhaps maybe that's the best way to end a program, is to know that we've just started it. We haven't ended it. And I think that's the piece that's most important. The relations between communities will only prosper by continuing that interaction, and rather than being isolated. And I think, as you pointed out, we tend to be isolated sometimes, afraid to speak to the other. And it's time that we perhaps became a little more forthright and got over some of our timidness, and we're welcome to say, welcome, hello, how are you? It's good to see you. That's what that begins the conversation, the same way you did with those Jamaicans on the playing field. They were probably stunned that you even spoke to them. And I'm sure they were delighted that you did.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I just want to reiterate that, one can take when we look at these movements, we take a long view and we see them as, different movements in our life. But what we actually can take is action, and an intentional action that each day we move out of comfort zones, and that we are intentional about our curiosity and our vulnerability with each other. That is an intentional decision one can make each and every day. And so, where do we go from here? We can make all sorts of, sketches and plans and what have you. But what each and every one of us can do as people of faith and people of if you will, good moral compass, is to live lives and question ourselves. What does it mean to live a life of love? What does it mean to live a life of faith? What does it mean to live a life that's a godly life? These are, there's tensions and there's gray areas, but they're important questions for us to ask, and we can actually live them out each and every day. And it makes life so much more fulfilling.
So with that, I would certainly give an amen. There's no question about it. I can't disagree with that, and I think it's something we have to do. So I'm going to say to everyone, thank you for participating in Temple Israel's series of virtual programs on engaging our community and continuing the dialogue. Mac Brendan, you've done an excellent job. I want to say thank you again on behalf of our synagogue and our president, James Goldfarb, and our Rabbi Fine. It was really great to have everyone here tonight, and we look forward to speaking to you again. So
Thank you very
everyone,
much.
Thank you, Bob. Sloan.
Do you want to mention the session next week?
please, Rabbi, mention about the next week's session,
When is it, Monday or Tuesday?
Monday.
Monday. I'm starting a two-part series. What did we call it?
Come on, Rabbi.
Oh, come on. I see, I thought you have it in front of you.
I probably do. Hang on, here it is. It's called, where'd it go? It's called Images of God in Music and the Machzor. How do we envision the God we pray to?
Ah,
It's a two-part series. The first part is the theology of Leonard Cohen. And the second part is unpacking Machzor metaphors. The Machzor is the High Holiday Prayer Book, Mac.
okay.
Unpacking Machzor metaphors. So it kind of follows from what we've been talking about tonight in a way.
8 o'clock on Monday next week. Please join us again as our series continues. And we look forward to Rabbi Rubens joining that group.
If we're home.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. We appreciate your questions and thoughts, and have a great night.
You
too.
too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.